Welcome to the webinar. My name's Scott Webb. I'm editor at Aqua Magazine. I have with me today Steve Barnes, who's Director of Science and Compliance at Aquastar Pool Products, and has just been handling, research and development, codes and standards for over 30 years in this industry. He's very well known for all of the education that he's done over the years. He serves as chair of the standard writing committees for various ones, including ANSI, APSP, ICC 16, 2017, where he oversees VGBA drain cover standards. It would be too lengthy to list everything. And today we're going to talk about navigating critical pool standards and codes. And Steve, let's get started.
All right. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate the kind words. As he mentioned, I've been in this for over 30 years. Actually, it was 40 years, March 1st of this year. Started out in the pool industry and research and development. And even before that, in high school and college, I was heavily involved in aviation. Wanted to go into the aviation field and aviation maintenance, loved science and technology and that kind of stuff. And why that's important, you'll see near the end of this, some of the stuff that's going on in space and even the bureaucratic politics involved in that. But another aspect that I think plays a role in this topic of codes and standards, I also shot fireworks professionally for 37 years. Going back to 1984. And these were big ones in Phoenix, Arizona, televised for over 10 years. And the significance of that is when you're talking about doing something on that level, and we're talking about explosives, there might be codes and standards involved in that. Yeah. And the significance of that is not only do we have to do it for safety of public and crew, and know what the heck we're doing while putting on a good show and delivering something. When it comes to the codes and standards and getting permits, it's so much more difficult and complicated dealing with that because you can't postpone the 4th of July. One point we had 200,000 people around the lake in Tempe, and we were on the bridge battling with the fire department who wasn't sure they were comfortable with all this. And I said, let's go talk to the mayor. We both worked to him, right? We can't send these people home and say, see you here tomorrow night. And I give you that background to say is I've been in the high stakes world of codes and standards for a while, and it's really informed some of what I'm going to get into today. And that is really that what we need to know as business leaders and all of that with our codes and standards, because they have gotten extremely complicated. And I don't see that changing without our direct involvement. So with no further ado, let me delve into this a little bit more. So, there's a classic saying that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So if we're not involved in the codes and standards or in the development or dealing with issues as they arise, be it suction safety, energy efficiency, ADA, the new concrete cancer that's going around Texas, and these kinds of things. If we as an industry are not proactive in dealing with the codes and standards where the rubber meets the road, then the government and others will step in and do it for us. And so that's sort of the message here. And I want to lay out the sort of complexity of this. And I think a way to do that will be to get control of my PowerPoint. I'm sorry. Okay. Is to understand the history and why codes matter. Okay, so why does this matter is to prevent future incidents. Why do we write laws, codes, and standards? It's notoriously after something bad has happened and we say, we've got to do something. And then government, code agencies, everybody jumps into action. And the whole idea, and it's an awesome idea, is to prevent future accidents. We just need to do it in a reasonable way that involves proactively shaping the future of our codes and standards. We need all subject matter experts involved in these various processes so that we get the best results possible that are sustainable, and so that we solve the problems without turning it into a bureaucratic mess that turns into gridlock. And that involves all of us working together, private sector, government, everybody. And then, so the whole idea is to reduce reactive changes to laws, codes, and standards. And I'll touch on some of the big milestones that have really changed the history of our industry and what we're dealing with. And on the, and heading into the future, a personal goal of mine is to try and transition from subjective best practices based inspections to pass-fail criteria that is measurable. And what I mean by that is, for example, the legacy code for drain covers and all that basically said, in the state and local codes was, either use two anti-vortex, 8-inch round drains that are 3 feet apart, or anything that's 12 by 12 or larger. And there was no testing, there was no standard, there was nothing on the 12 by 12 or larger, and yet we have entrapments. And so part of the reaction to address all of that was to create testing in the standard for drain covers. And so we moved from what were perceived as best practice to something that was actually tested and we know. And so best practices are good until we can replace them with something that's more concrete, preferably a pass-fail, so that anybody who follows the building codes and standards and they are educated and they're doing it professionally doesn't have to worry about a building official or a health inspector who is not an expert come in and say, well, that's not really how I like it. We think this best practice is what you need to do. That happens all the time, and it often involves jackhammers on existing public pools with VGB compliance issues. So, and this is sort of what we at Aquastar deal with day in and day out. That sort of makes me a little sensitive to the subject, and so that will form where we're going with this. So, relative to why staying current with the codes and standards really matters. Obviously, safety and compliance, we need to build pools that are safe, reliable, and certainly meet all essential standards. And the standards and the codes I'm going to talk about, those are minimum. Those are not engineering best practices that are advocated at the high end when you go to the premium design brands of Genesis, water shapes, and things like that. They far exceed these standards. So that's not what I'm talking about. That's where we excel as an industry by moving into those worlds and learning more and stretching our knowledge and the technologies of our pools and that kind of a thing. Obviously, they have to be tailored to the clientele and the customers and the setting. But there's a lot of what makes our industry great that is above these minimum standards. The minimum standards are really to avoid costly risks. Non-compliance can lead to penalties, legal issues, lost trust. One of the examples in the milestones that sort of changed things related to the Virginia Graham Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act was Zachary Cohn in July of 2007. I believe he was 6 years old. And it was one of those old best practices pools where it had a 12 by 12, one of them on the wall and nothing else. That was the best practice, not to be confused with the then building code that required 2 drains, regardless of their size, and a secondary system, even if it was dual drains. And basically a contractor and the building officials just ignored all of that. That settlement was, I think, I meant to do a slide on this. I think it was $20 million, might even have been a little bit north of that. There was multiple lawsuits filed, and they charged the building officials. They went after the building department. There was like 12 people that were named in this, all because they used the old best practices and didn't follow the new codes. Then they did not maintain that single drain properly, and we tragically lost Zach in the process. And so that was sort of a game changer. You'll see it in the timeline coming up. And then moving beyond that is it's essential for success to stay informed of these critical elements, because you're going to see coming up that once the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code gets adopted, it comes along with, it's like 38 states and over 500 municipalities. And with it, it's one book, but it references dozens of other standards that the building officials are looking to make sure those standards are also met. The easy one to understand would be VGB and the drain cover standard, right? So you're going to build a pool. Part of the sub inspection is the suction safety system. And that's going to be looked at by the building officials. But those details are not in the ISPSC. They're in ANSI 7, which is mandatorily required by the ICC or by the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code, compliance with that. And then you obviously, federal law, you have to follow the instructions related with that. There's examples on energy efficiency and all kinds of other things. And compliance with these laws and codes requires that you know it all. And so it's critical to stay informed with this stuff. And hopefully this will give you a road map to that. So it's really important to understand codes and standards are effective for compliance. And this is just sort of an example of the books and things that are involved. So the building codes like the ISPSC generally regulate, but they provide references. And so true compliance means knowing both the overarching code, but the specific references that are in them. And where people and contractors get into trouble are the missed details. That's the stuff that causes those red tags, those delays that are causing things to be kicked back at plan review. And it's because the building officials are learning more and more. The ICC, who publishes the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code, they're training year-round all over the country. We have the groups, like I mentioned, the Genesis and the Water Shapes and Pool Nation and all kinds of organizations that are teaching and training these things, so the knowledge base is out there. And so missing the details can lead to failed inspections, delays, and obviously safety risks. So the key is to stay informed on all of these layers.
How are the people who are not missing the details? How are people who are truly mastering this entire tome of standards? How are they doing it? How are they avoiding those mistakes? To me, it seems like an enormous job when I look at the volumes, of codes that you have to master. What are some of the best practices for making sure that you don't miss those details?
Sort of there's two categories of this, in my opinion, would be, and I'll focus on the pool builders and contractors, right? Because we're really sort of talking about pool building codes and standards. So if you look at pool contractors, if they're doing it in-house, like the big companies, many of the big companies do, they have to have this level of expertise in-house. So everything from electrical to plumbing to final finish in the plaster, Pebble Tech, that kind of stuff, is at that point, you got to know it all if you're going to do it all. For those that subcontract, it's, they need to hire people that know what they're doing. So like the plasterers need to be experts in that, the plumbers, the electricians. And so when you break down, it's incredibly complex and detailed, But if you're hiring professionals, whether you've hired them as an in-house contractor or going outside, it needs to be part of the business decision to know this stuff because it's getting so expensive to get it wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah, do they do the same thing that other organizations, that the one that just popped into my mind were university sports departments now have compliance officers whose only job is to know all of the regulations, and they go around making sure everybody adheres to them. Do any companies at the top level have an actual compliance person for swimming pool codes and standards?
Well, I would say one example might be Aquastar. I'm the director of science and compliance, and I would say I spend, well, when you count the compliance that's required for Aquastar, be it the VGB drain covers, pumps, filters, valves, all the things that are regulated primarily by NSF 50, I play that role. You go to the big companies on the manufacturing side, and I have colleagues, in some cases, two or three within big organizations. I think some of the big distributors have dedicated people that focus on compliance. Now, their world is a lot, even, and this might look complicated, but theirs is even more complicated when you get into FCC and compliance and regulations and shareholders and all of OSHA and trucking and all of those kinds of things. So yeah, it's pretty common. I think when you get into bigger pool builders, I'm from Arizona, so I think back on the paddocks. They're no longer around, but I know they had dedicated teams to keep up with ever-changing codes and standards in the Arizona market. So it's out there. The challenge is for the smaller companies. And I don't necessarily have an easy answer for that other than to go out, get education, be aware, attend events like this for compliance on specific stuff. Whoever your manufacturer is, they help you. One of the main things that the big gotcha for everyone from a legal liability standpoint is not following instructions. So especially since the VGB Act, where now drain covers and how they're installed and all that is a federal law, the defense that was often muddied the water in the battles before there was a federal law or mandatory drain cover was people say, well, I just didn't know. And no one explained this to me, or, I wasn't informed. It's not my fault. Well, none of that is, I don't even think, is admissible once you've broken the law. That's like, okay, you're guilty now. What's your penalty?
Right.
And so that is a big game changer. So follow instructions. I know that the warnings and all of that are a bit crazy, and I think we could do better as a society to put meaningful warnings. But in the meantime, those are manufacturers' get out of jail free cards. So you just have to follow instructions at a minimum. Because when you talk about these things that we're talking about, VGB compliance, be it sumps and drain covers and how they're installed in the pool, pumps, are they compliant with the new variable speed pump law? Are they a bootlegged? There's so electrical safety. There's so many things that are permanent to the pool structure that you may, as pool contractors and builders and service pros, maybe say, I've never had an issue in any of my pools. And you could go 20 years and then it only takes one. And guess what? When something bad happens, they go into the backyard or into the pool and they measure and they check. And you've left proof of non-compliance in concrete. There's just no wiggle room left. So we've got to get it on the front end.
Steve, I just had one quick thought that also came up was when there is a question from an inspector, should the pool builder refer the inspector to PHTA or the manufacturer?
If it's product specific, the manufacturer. If it's standard related, to ANSI 7, for example, suction entrapment avoidance. What do you do in the backyard? There's not a product standard. It references product standards, but it's how the contractor did it. Those kinds of things I would go to reach out to, in this case, the PHTA, if it's National Electric Code. So it sort of depends. If it's a product specific thing, start with the manufacturer because they should know all of this. Now, not all of us do, but they should. And if it's more general, then trade associations, PHTA, Florida Swimming Pool Association, and NESPA up in the Northeast both have very robust support systems that will help contractors with a variety of standards. So, it's sort of a couple of different options there. And we work real good, we as manufacturers, the trade associations, standard writers, I think we're pretty good at referring you to the right people. So start with your manufacturer. If that doesn't work, reach out to the trade association or the standard writing company, ICC, and they can help point you in the right direction. And don't be afraid to do that. But don't be shocked when there's like, oh, we're not sure, try this. But heading down that road is the key to success.
Gotcha.
So let me sort of paint where we've been. And this will kind of take two tracks, the public pool history that you see on the screen here. And the next one is going to be more on the residential pool standards and how they came about. This has sort of created a fork in the road relative to codes and standards. There's the water quality, waterborne issue, what the governments are doing, local governments are doing to address public pools and spas and that kind of a thing. Then there's the whole residential side. And in researching this to make sure I was up to speed on this history, I was actually surprised by some of this, and it sort of changed the direction of this presentation to a degree. But so let's start with the history. In the lower left, 1926 is the first formal, and learned of this through the Swimming Pool Hall of Fame, actually has copies of this in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And some of my NASA friends found this stuff. And that sort of changed the course of even this standard, New York public pools. That's where the Gage and Bidwell serial dilution sort of stuff originated, that has shown up in the Model Aquatic Health Code and others. And so that was really a milestone. And it started when pools in New York went from flow through. So they basically heat water, put it in through the bottom of massive pools, and then they would overflow into the scum gutter and go out to the creek, basically. And they added pumps and filters to recirculate the water through the main drain that had been a drain like a bathtub. And they did that for energy efficiency purposes. The New York went, whoa, 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 we're recirculating bad, dangerous water. We got to look at this. And that's what really triggered the 1926 code. Then over time, in 28, California, 31, Illinois, they adopted those similar standards, guidelines, if you will. Then in 1941 is when New York came back and revised this stuff and added actual pass-fail criteria. You either hit these chlorine levels, circulation, filtration, turnover rates, or we're going to close you down. Before that, it was a sort of guidance, really. So 1941 marks a milestone in pool code enforcement. Then we see similar things, Michigan, Ohio, New Jersey, Texas. And Texas was sort of interesting. And if you've ever been to San Antonio, they have some really historic old pools that have been around probably maybe even going back to the 1920s. And they got massive bather loads. It's hot and muggy, and they are used for bathtubs. Basically, that's where the joke, I take a bath, for those old like me, is there was a joke, so take a bath once a week, whether I need it or not, and that's every Saturday. And the whole genesis of that joke is they would drain the pools Sunday, reopen them for the rich and famous on Monday through Friday, and then open it up to the general public on Saturday. And so the neighborhood kids and everybody came to bat. This goes back in the 1920s and before hot water in houses. So that's sort of where that started. And all of the, there's a lot of detail on the outbreaks, cholera, and other things. And then, as we moved through time, 1947 in Florida, I was surprised because I think, Arizona seems so young, but it was actually 1948 and then Pennsylvania. And this actually goes on, this timeline goes all the way up into the 70s, but I'll spare you that detail. So I'm going to jump off in the 1950s to bring you to the residential pool standards history. And this is what I literally learned researching this. I was sort of aware of it, but I went in and dug into the details. So the NSPI, which is the original PHTA, was actually established in 1956. And it was when a merger between the National Swimming Pool Builders Association and the Swimming Pool Equipment Manufacturers Association, they got together and to begin writing a residential swimming pool standard, because everything we just looked at was public pools. And so they realized the same issues exist in the residential world. So they went to work on the first voluntary residential standard that was published in 1961. It's quite simple compared to what we're doing today, but just shows you that the pool industry has actually been pretty proactive. And there's pros and cons in that. There's certainly been a controversial history associated with this, but it is our collective history. Another big milestone was in 1986, ASME introduced the drain cover standard that is now the VGB drain cover standard. And it was originally ASME, ANSI A112 198M. This is 1986. So again, if you're old like me, you were getting ready for the metric system. That didn't happen. Not here. And that's what the M stood for. A little trivia for you. That was voluntary. Then the NSPI actually became ANSI accredited relative to producing ANSI standards between 1991 and 1992. And they came out with one: public pools, public spas, on-ground, above-ground portable spas, the on-ground pool, kit pools, and then portable spas. We call them hot tubs today. So they were really on the forefront. Again, these are pretty basic and rudimentary standards, but it just shows the industry has been trying to do something about this. And 1995 is when the residential pool standard became ANSI. So it was originated voluntarily in 61, and then it became an ANSI standard in 95. Barriers, fencing, and that kind of thing was also in 95. If we'd have continued with the public or the state timeline, in the I think mid 80s, early 90s, Arizona passed an Arizona law requiring fencing around residential swimming pools and barriers between the house and the pool in the form of a latch that had to be 54 inches above. That was a big deal in the Phoenix area when I was first getting involved in the codes and standards, and I decided to stay out of it after attending one hearing, and the fire department was railing against the 54-inch thing that still exists today because it trapped disabled and young children in houses that were on fire. And so they were like, we need people out of these houses. And if they can't get to the pool, they can't get out of the house. That's a problem. Then there was debate over, should it be 5 foot, 4 foot, 8 foot? And I was like, you know what? I'm out. I am not going to become an expert in barriers. I was already involved in the drain covers and in-floor cleaning system and all of that. But that was sort of a hot potato then and now. And that's continued. Jump into 2004 was the NSPI actually introduced the NSPI 9 for public aquatic recreational facilities. That's the water parks and all of that. They tried to get into it. Honestly, from my perspective, I was involved at the time. That group, the then NSPI, did not have stakeholders and subject matter experts in that world. And so that was a bit of an overreach, and that standard is now gone. It is coming back now into our new standards as the scope of what is now PHTA 1, public pools and spas, is in the revision process right now. And these facilities, to a degree, will be included, but I think it's going to focus on the water quality, what the rides and the slides and tipping buckets, all of that's largely regulated by ASTM standards and the manufacturer. So anyway, bringing all of this together. And then another milestone is in 2006, the NSPI became the Association of Pool and Spa Professionals. And if you were following even any of the discussions on LinkedIn about this presentation, some of those histories, there was a little sidebar on that about why Manili was the reason the NSPI had to reorganize because they made standards. No, it's because they didn't do a good job of promoting them, was sort of the gist of that case. The pool where a young man was dove in and became a paraplegic was not built to the NSPI standard, but still it basically destroyed the organization. So the organizations and standard writers had to pay attention on an organizational level to those kinds of liabilities, even furthering the detail. But the good news is you don't need to worry about that. And to be involved, you don't need to worry about that. We've got people to protect us relative to lawyers and keep us on the guardrails of doing everything fair and balanced and all of that kind of thing. And just, to further depress you on how involved this is only 12% of the codes and standards that impacted between 2006 and today. I hit the highlights that are really important things that will cause red tags if you don't follow them. There's a lot more nuance involved.
Wow.
So at this point, I want to sort of pull back. Now I've probably overwhelmed you. I overwhelmed myself to a degree. So I want to talk about what the process is that you need to learn going forward, certainly as residential pool construction contractors, but the same thing applies to public pools. But they're so highly regulated, those people involved probably know all of this and would do a better job teaching it than I am. But if we looked at the ISPSC, it's the building code that references the standards. So the VGB Act drain cover standard is a big example. Another is ANSI 15, which is residential energy efficiency. That's going to set the size of the filtration system for residential pools, minimum pump capability, minimum filter size, minimum pipe size, including that the suction system be designed basically like a public pool, that it doesn't exceed 6 feet per second. All of that is to drive the industry to use larger pipe, larger filters, and variable speed pumps so that we can maintain the same water quality. And when this is done, it actually improves without wasting energy. And so that's what's driving a lot of this. And when you get into the inspection phase, this is where we do a lot of technical support, PHTA and some of those standards, but also Aquastar's company and others that are supporting is the pool going to be compliant on all of these things? And that's plan review. You have to document what your suction system is going to be, for example, what your pump, what your filter, all of that is at plan review. And if you submit stuff, it could be a beautiful rendered animated, pool drawing that looks spectacular and sells well, but the underlying core hydraulics, not so much electrical, but hydraulics and efficiency and all of that, if that's not included, it's getting kicked back. And that delays projects, it delays, it costs money, it aggravates customers. So it's really important for pool builders, whether they're doing it in-house, which they should know all of this, or if they're subbing it out, they need to make sure that the subcontractors are following an actual plan that meets the codes and standards. Then there's the in-process construction. There is a move to make sure now that the pipe is uncovered, open trench inspections, so they can validate pipe size and all of that. There's some jurisdictions that when that doesn't happen, they're going in with cameras. The amount of detail that's going into this in the last few years is actually shocking even to me. And the goal is that we do such a good job, we don't need them looking over our shoulder. And then the final thing is the final inspection. And we're seeing the failures at this point where brand new shell, they're having to go in and jackhammer out to change the suction system. Primarily is it's field built sumps and the pipe's too shallow, and no drain cover manufacturer has a cover that's compatible with that made in the field thing with a flow rate that the pump and system needs. So the point is the key going forward is to get on in front of these core critical issues. And so
I was just gonna, how big a problem is that? How much is being lost to inspections that are failed and they have to redo the, jackhammer the pool, or to, redo the plumbing, or how big a problem is that?
it's hard to quantify on the residential side because they're not as heavily inspected. And I only hear about it once, basically. And it's coming out of jurisdictions that have just recently adopted the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code. And with the I codes comes a whole chapter on how to inspect and permits and plan review. And so when the ISPSC is adopted, for example, in Georgia, now those building officials they're required to follow the process of plan review and inspection in the ISPSC. Then the pool contractor learns this the hard way, didn't even realize that they needed to. And then that's the case where we're hearing about it and what can we do? Sometimes we can trade to a different retrofit cover versus the new construction version that they install. But my experience is they only do it once or maybe a few times because they had 2 or 3 or 4 pools in process when they learned this. The biggest place we're seeing it all over is because of in public pools, specifically the smaller apartment complexes, small hotels, motels, RV parks, condo associations, those organizations that don't have big bucks, and they often will be rely on in-house maintenance staff to take care of the pools. And now with the VGB Act and some of the incidents that happen, the health departments are demanding that they know pipe size, pipe depth, what's the flow rate of the pump, what is the filter, what is the turnover rate, and when you have to replace expired drain covers, they're making them go through the entire hydraulic system. That by and far is where we're seeing equipment rooms modified and jackhammers, and especially spas with 2 pumps. So it's hard to track exactly, other than the wave of where states have historically not had their own pool code or weren't obligated to enforce it, like comes along with this. That's where we're seeing that.
I just got a quick question from one of our attendees. Do you think that taking video or photos during the construction would be acceptable to an inspector, trying to pass your inspection?
The answer to that one is without exceptions, yes.
Okay.
And even the toughest, and I'm not going to name names here, but there's a couple of states and municipalities that are extremely tough and kind of don't trust us as an industry. And so they always, to my knowledge, will accept photos. And I know there's tools and software that you can do that. I mean, but they'll accept camera rolls and text messages and stuff like that. They really are trying to do a good job. There's no doubt about that. And they just want to know, they want to know enough information that it's traceable to a specific property. And the best example of where they really cracked down was in a state where it was a service company that was doing a bunch of hundreds of pools with VGB compliant drain covers, and they're enforcing the pipe size, pipe depth, and pipe orientation, and they require pictures. And then about the 15th pool, they're like, you know what? I've seen that leaf before. And then they went through and they realized that they were just submitting the same pictures of different angles of the same pools and the same drains. That didn't end well, by the way. And now they make them do FaceTime to prove they're in the pool and here. That's the extreme, but I think it's a great idea. Certainly, we do it with our ANSI testing and all of that. Is we just document each critical step in an inspection point, and then just put it in the folder of the project, or in this case, the pool project or a service project. There's software that enables that. I hear it advertised. I don't have any personal experience with it. Me, I just have a camera roll that's got like 16,000 drain cover pictures, and that's not an exaggeration. There's a better way, but yeah. The other thing is if you are proactive and use forms that, on your plans, here's the drain covers, here's the pump, here's the filter, document what you're doing, do it consistently, and then your AHJs that are doing plan reviews and inspections, they're coming from a position of trust because you're doing the right thing. So when you make a mistake or your people make a mistake and it happens, they're like, oh, okay, we missed one. We need to fix this. Let me know when you're done, and we're good to go. If you're ducking and weaving and fabricating evidence, then they spend all of their time with you and leave good contractors alone. So maybe it's not bad. Moving on, we've got a few minutes here. The International Swimming Pool is why I am a fan of this over, for example, the Model Aquatic Health Code, is it gives municipalities one book to reference. Pools and spas shall be built in accordance with the ISPSC. Now, behind this, you have the APSP. You see the Pool and Hot Tub, excuse me, the Pool and Hot Tub Alliance is involved in this. The ICC, they're a big organization, a multinational, international organization. They do a lot of training. The building officials are familiar with that process, and it's easy to adopt. And then there's lots of support. By having standardized pool codes and standards, all of us manufacturers, organizations, Genesis and Water Shapes and NESPA and California Swimming Pool, go across Texas, all over it. By having a uniform building code and reference standards, we all can help you succeed, and we're teaching the same things. And where we have problems that need to be fixed because of gaps or errors, improvements, there's a process that's very open that allows us to make changes in an incremental way. The ISPSC, the Model Aquatic Health Code, and ANSI standards are typically on a 3 to a 5 year. So we can say, hey, we got to update. We need to fix something, but you will know it's coming, hopefully because you're participating or at least observing. Then it's going to get published. Then there's going to be time for it to be adopted. So ideally, as we progress as an industry and society, there will be time to prepare and come up with a good business model for this. One of the things down here on the bottom is ACI standard. I reference this is because now it is in the ISPSC, and the ICI is the concrete standard. And so it was sort of just left up to the local. Now compliance means that the Shot Creek Gunite crew actually has to hit the concrete standards. So if you have a pool that is up against, in a high water table issue, so you have water on both sides of the shell, then that shell concrete is very different than the Arizona desert or something where it's just in sand. So it's very specific to the application. And I reference this because of the concrete cancer issue that we have, that's propped up all over the country, but dominant in central Texas, where pools that are 3 and 4 years old are coming apart. The cancer is destroying, and my understanding is the only solution is to start over, and so that won't happen if you follow the ACI standard. That's a great thing, right? But now you're dealing with a lot more complication. And obviously we're dependent on our shotcrete and concrete crews to do this. There's Nozzleman requirements so that we don't have rebound in the bottom of pools, which is notoriously where they crack, and all of that kind of detail. So when you're an expert in a field, you really have to be an expert all the way to the end. So here's just a little bit of, on the ICC again. The standards are, the ANSI standards are referenced in it. I'm on the code council. I've been involved with this, trying to every couple of years. So, we are pretty heavily invested in this, but we stick with it because of this map. If you look, it's a little fuzzy, but it's the red states are mandatory ISPSC, meaning you have to build public and residential pools to these standards. 21 optional. And then there's 558 local adoptions, and then the Grand Caymans and international. So this is everywhere, and it's expanding because it's successful. And so just a heads up, this is coming your way eventually, in my opinion. And even if it's not specifically in your jurisdiction and they're not enforcing it, when there's any kind of issue on a pool, be it safety or concrete, structural, electrical, any of those kinds of things, the experts that will show up at your project are going to be using these kinds of documents to judge your work. So even if you don't get inspected on it, the pools are permanent, and so you have to live with this. So at a minimum, even if you don't have to deal with it, look into it so you're not caught unaware. And so now returning real quickly, and this is the home stretch here, on the residential pool standards. We saw this before, okay? All of this 2000 through 2015, all of these were voluntary, or certainly through 2011, were voluntary until they were incorporated into the ISPSC. So that map you just saw, that means you get all of these standards that you see a green star next to, that you're going to be judged by that, either up front, in the middle of the process, or potentially later. And then the third one on the far right, the yellow star, that's the newest PHTA standard on elevated standards. So if you're going to put a water on a rooftop, a parking garage, or any of that, we know what happened in Miami with the whole tower coming down because of the structure being, the pool leaking into the concrete and all of that. So this standard is if you're going to build a pool, follow all the other standards to the left here, but you have to do double containment. So when those pools leaks, pipes breaks, filters leaks, concrete leaks, fittings, skimmers, lights, they all leak potentially. We have to know where that water's going and can control it. So expect that to be coming down the pipe eventually. But if it's got a green star, it came with the ISPSC. So now I want to turn my attention a little bit now to wrap this up with what triggered major events and causing the proliferation of these codes and standards. In the 1990s, there were cryptosporidium outbreaks, including, I'm not sure what year it was, but in Phoenix, Arizona, where there was the city at the time owned and operated 7 pools, I believe. So they hired the lifeguards. One of the pools had a crypto outbreak, and it took a week to find it, kind of a thing. Hundreds of people were sick. Well, obviously they closed the pool and they reassigned the exposed lifeguards to the other 6 pools and then spread it throughout the whole city. And so those kinds of mega events is what got Michael Beach, specifically with the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, to go investigate this thing called cryptosporidium. That was really the start of what we now know as the Model Aquatic Health Code. As they tried to look at this, Model Aquatic Health Code, I think, published for the first time in 2012 or 2014. So slow moving, but important work. 2007 was the Virginia Graham Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act. It originated because of Virginia Graham Baker, and she was the entrapment in 2002, but it didn't become federal law until 2007, because that April we had Abigail Taylor, who was eviscerated on a public pool, and then we have Zachary Cohn. That was that 12 by 12 limb entrapment that I talked about. And there was such an outcry of dealing with these preventable tragedies that the federal government got involved. They adopted the drain cover standard that published for the first time in February of 2007. They made it federal law. They gave manufacturers, test labs, installers, and pool owners 1 year to implement all of that. And if you were around, you know what a zoo and chaos that was. So again, the trigger was these tragedies. And then now we're looking at the why we have the concrete standard is beginning in 2017. We started to see this ASR issue happening in Texas and other parts of the country. So we have to get a handle on the quality of our concrete. So now we have a concrete standard and certifications associated with that. And the newest one was the Lazy River from earlier this year in Houston, Texas, where it was what I call a turbine pump. I know that's not correct. Forgive me, everyone. It's the axial flow pump. Looks like a boat prop to me. 12-inch pipe, and it basically is a lazy river that had dual VGBA drains. And then normally there would be a nozzle array in this 12-inch pipe, kind of like, so it looks like a Gatling gun. That was never installed by whoever installed this system. I'm hearing without a permit. The system was changed. Either the pump was rewired or it was reprogrammed or something. But anyway, that boat prop was running backwards. There was nothing but a 12-inch open pipe, and we lost a 9-year-old girl, 8-year-old girl into the pipe. U.S. consumer, we don't know all of the details, at least I don't, about this, but we do know is it prompted the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission to propose 4 changes to our ANSI standards, 2 for the drain cover, 2 for general construction, that will regulate return fittings, eyeballs, jet spas, all of that. That's potentially coming down the pike. But because of what you see above, we know as an industry that we have to get involved. The PHTA will do funding to really figure out what constitutes a finger entrapment versus a limb entrapment versus a whole body entrapment. So we have work on our hands here. Hopefully what we know is that our current standards are working. So if the manufacturer's instructions have been followed, if it had been assembled properly, we wouldn't be talking about this. So hopefully what will happen because of this is improved education, maybe some clarifications on the standards, but hopefully it won't be crazy that we end up in a whole new mess like we had in 2007. And to be very clear, one of the proposals basically is with a covers missing, we want a second one. And so we looked at that, and if you put 2 drain covers, one below another, it's a fantastic way to tangle hair. And we don't even solve the problem if the first cover is broken or missing. Once we presented that from a science-based with 21 people, 5 building officials, contractors, manufacturers, test labs, and said, no, this is not a good idea. The CPSC, proving interaction with our government works, went, oh, yeah, that's probably not a good idea. And they withdrew it because we've addressed that particular hazard and we just need to now look at the others. And so it's a silver lining, in my opinion, is I think we're doing a good job working together. And I want to close out with this and make sure you see I got opinion very, very large here. And this I want to talk about, and Aquastar knew nothing about this, so don't be mad at them if I make you mad. But I want to talk about the culture difference associated when private industry working together with regulators, AHJs, building officials, health departments, engineering firms, National Drowning Prevention Alliance, the families, if we all, energy efficiency from EPA, the Department of Energy, we look at everything holistically about these topics we're talking about, I think that is the recipe for success. When we have top-down government mandates by non-experts. Now, don't get me wrong, they're absolutely experts. The CDC has got amazing people that are doing amazing work to prevent disease and outbreaks and that kind of a thing, but they're not pool builders. They're not pool operators. They're looking at the water. We as an industry have to look at the equipment to make sure the water is clean. That's the building codes and all of that. But I want to contrast, the reason I'm showing this picture of me in 2006, that's a visitor badge, by the way. I was never with NASA, but I did have the privilege of working with them in Huntsville, Alabama, as part of a Space Act agreement, and we were researching solutions for the Virginia Graham Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act. So NASA was supporting the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission. That's how I got involved. Lower right is the NIST standard for flow meters. And I'm standing in front of the first rocket test site where we, in the 50s, I believe, 40s, started launching rockets. So very cool experience. I share this in this level of detail because dealing with literal rocket scientists, they were extremely frustrated with the culture of NASA that had transitioned from results and testing to standards to rules, that everything's got to be certified, that it's got to be tested and have ISO level, actually it's mil spec. It's just crazy what it takes to certify the use of a roll of duct tape. Literally, I was using duct taping pipe together when we were doing the VGB testing with NASA scientists, recording the data, and they're like, what are you doing? That won't work. And I was like, yeah, it works great. And it holds pipe together and you can just figure it out. Well, they implemented, that's a true story, they implemented in their giant tank, I think it's down in Houston. It's like the biggest freshwater tank where it's full of spaceships and they do it underwater. They spent a year getting their own brand of certified duct tape just so they could use it. Spent something like $1 million certifying duct tape. I give you that detailed example to say there's a point where bureaucracy and rules is no one's friend. And so, well, what's the path forward? I think we need to collectively, and with this, I'm going to bash Boeing a little bit because it's just heartbreaking with my background to see what happened, that we sent a spaceship to the space station and it had to return empty because of safety and concerns like that. And so this,
Flight
to
Director
me,
Chloe Marion just asked for quiet in the room as we are approaching
oh, I
1
don't
minute
have to
out
obey
from
her.
Starliner undocking.
But basically, you're going to see the Starliner depart
And we just heard confirmation
the
that
space
the
station here a
umbilicals are
couple of weeks
retracting
ago,
and hooks are
and
beginning
then
to
it
dry.
ultimately comes back empty. And here is it.
Touchdown. Starliner is back on Earth. That landing coming at 11:01 and 35 seconds Central Time, 10:01 and 31 seconds Mountain Time at White Sands Space Harbor at the U.S. Army's Missile Range in New Mexico. Our landing and recovery.
Okay, so I'm playing this audio so you can hear the tone. Obviously, this worked out okay. They would have been okay coming home on the spacecraft, but we didn't know, and that's the problem. want you to contrast what happened on Sunday morning, 7:30 a.m. in Texas.
13 of those Raptor engines in this view is incredible right now. You can see how fast this vehicle is moving on the left-hand.
In case you don't know, this thing is like the size of a 3-story, I don't know, 280 feet tall. This thing.
We can see those.
I watched this and thought we were about to see a very big mess.
I still can't wrap my mind around what was done here. I didn't
Little
think
different crowd reaction, eh?
for
I can go ahead and
50 years.
We're just seconds away here from ending. Watch. I want you to see the team that made this possible. This is people working together for a common good, following codes and standards and rules, and most importantly, the laws of physics, because they always win. And with that, I'm a minute long, Scott, but there you go.
Steve, I am all for as long as I've been talking to you. I always look forward to it. I learned so much. It's always an interesting discussion, and I always bring away things that I can use later. And I've got a lot of notes here that I'll be following up in other ways. I want to thank everyone for coming. Learned a lot. Think about your roles in codes and standards formation. And I think that'll do it for today. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. My pleasure.